Hello and welcome to Talk Truth. My name is Corey Huntsberger. I've got my father, Alan Huntsberger, in the studio. We're going to start off with our foundational verse. It gives us some kind of, foundation, a center, because right now, Alan, the world's gone crazy, but this just gives me peace. It really does. The earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants belong to the Lord, for he laid its foundation on the seas and established it on the rivers. Psalm 24, 1 and 2. You and I believe that God created the world, everything in it, all the people, all the animals, all the bugs, kind of a deal. And there's a lot of people. You got the World Economic Forum, you've got government, you've got Bill Gates, Soros, all these people taking a grab, saying, we own the world and this is what you're all going to do. You're going to eat bugs and you're going to like it. But that's our foundation, right?
Yes, it absolutely is. And now we have Prime Minister Carney, who's going to do the same thing. He's the boy that's put in place from the WEF to get Canada into the European Union and get us away from the United States, that, ugly neighbor next to us, and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because I believe God is in control. We can look at all of this other stuff and get caught up real tight in worry and concern, but God is in control, and that's what we can rest on.
Yeah. Well, this show's going to be interesting. It'll be our first show really about tariffs. We're kind of going to talk about tariffs. We've got a great guest on. His name is Spencer Morrison. He's the author of Reshore, How Tariffs Will Bring Our Jobs Home and Revive the American Dream. Spencer, welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure being here.
Spencer, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're a lawyer. Tell us a little bit about you so we can just set up before we get into the book.
Certainly. So I'm a lawyer, I'm a Christian, and I've been writing about this topic for about 10 or 11 years now. I have a column. Yeah, it's a long time coming. This book actually was written about 2 years ago. And it just so happened that President Donald Trump was elected, and and everything sort of came together. So it's based on research that I've been working on for about a decade, and like I said, this is it's a very thorough deep dive into the issue of tariffs and economic growth more generally.
Well, I'm glad you're here to help explain it, because tariffs, there's so much, I feel like there's so much misinformation and disinformation. That's me saying it about the lamestream media, which is because I feel like there's all this fear and taxes and what's he doing? He's going to kill the economy, and then the stock's going down. And we know that mainstream media always, anything that has to do with Trump and whatever he does, they always want to light it on fire and doomsday. Can we go into a little bit about tariffs, kind of explain it to us? Because there's a history there. This isn't the first time this has happened. Tariffs have existed. Let's get into it.
Yeah, actually, over the last 50 years, there's been a complete reversal in trade policy in America. As a matter of fact, the very first piece of legislation in the States was the Tariff Act of 1789, which was signed by George Washington, and it was created and crafted on the basis of Alexander Hamilton's work. 2 years later, he published this report called the Report on Manufactures. And really, it was an industrial policy for America, and tariffs were a core element of that industrial policy. What the Founding Fathers actually learned through a hard-fought experience was that a country that cannot manufacture its basic necessities, in particular its military equipment, is not going to be a free nation for long. So in the American Revolution, for example, the revolution almost didn't get off the ground because the American colonies simply didn't manufacture enough firearms, they didn't manufacture enough swords, they didn't manufacture enough textiles, steel, the whole 9 yards. And it wasn't until other European powers, in particular the French, sort of came to the rescue and shipped America over 80,000 firearms that the revolution actually got off the ground. So what the Founding Fathers learned is that political freedom and political independence is built and predicated upon economic independence. So that's what tariffs are all about. Tariffs are about creating a safe environment for the accumulation of domestic capital and the industrialization of the nation. And America prospered under the tariff regimes for over 150 years. You think about, during the 1800s, America had the highest tariff rate in the world. It was over 30% on average, which is huge. And that was in an age before you had all this mass shipping and globalization too, right? If you think about it, what would that correlate to a tariff now, given that it's over 100%. So America industrialized and prospered off of tariffs. And 50 years ago, the tariff walls were torn down, and American workers were forced to compete with the Chinese, and wages stagnated. Over 60,000 factories left American shores, and we've just had a whole decoupling of the American dream.
Mm. Now, America used to be like built on manufacturing. I mean, like 100%. And it didn't really hit me until, I know this is going to sound weird because I know everything you go in the store, it says made in China. Your shirts are made from Indonesia, and all this kind of stuff. What really surprised me was when it was COVID and we needed medication, and I realized that all our medication is coming out of China. I mean, that was like, whoa, wait a minute now. We're in a health crisis. We need masks and gloves and all this stuff. And we got to rely on China when America is in a health crisis. That really is when it really hit me. We have a problem. And I know other states knew it's a problem a long time. Detroit, manufacturing cars or whatever kind of thing. I know Pittsburgh and the steel. I know that there's a lot of people knew that this is dying a long time ago. But for me, that's when it was a wake up call. Wait a minute. When we're in trouble, when we're in crisis, we shouldn't have to rely on other countries, for supplies. That's when it woke me up. Can you tell us a little bit about the book, what's in it, what are we going to learn, and why are tariffs good? Because, like I said, everything we know about them is bad, scary, high taxes, terrifying.
Well, you're going to learn everything there is to know about tariffs. I mean, the reality is that most of the news and information that's put out about tariffs is fake. They teach you fake history in school. They print fake news in the media. Everything about tariffs is entirely backwards. For example, there's this myth that America was founded on free trade, and it was this libertarian economic paradise. Couldn't be further from the truth. Like I said, America had the highest average tariff rate all throughout the 1800s. And that's the period during which America industrialized. The founding fathers all supported tariffs. Even Thomas Jefferson, who was famously in favor of free trade after the War of 1812, even he came around and he said, look, I'm going to buy nothing but domestic products, and you should too. And he wrote that in a letter in 1816. So what the book does is it gives some context for this debate, this historical context that everybody's missing. They don't teach history in schools anymore, right? So we gotta do a lot to rebuild our knowledge base. So in the book, I provide a history of tariffs. I also have an outline of sort of what's happened to America's economy over the last 50 years, like when everything went wrong. Here are some facts that are going to blow you away. America's run a chronic trade deficit every year since 1974. The cumulative value of that trade deficit after you adjust it for inflation, it's $25 trillion. $25 trillion has been spent buying goods rather than building them. And you think about all of the domestic investment that could have funded, all of the profits that would have went into the pockets of American producers, and of course, all of that money, is then reinvested in the local economy, rebuilding infrastructure, improving our cities, our roads, our communities. All of that money went abroad. On top of that, there's been huge capital outflows through this thing called foreign direct investment, right? It's when an American company goes and builds a factory in China or Vietnam, wherever it is. It's in the trillions of dollars. We're talking at least over $2 trillion that was spent by American investors to build factories in China and other countries. On top of that, a lot of people don't understand this, but when you move a factory to China, you have to partner with a Chinese corporation. So there's like a joint venture that takes place. And the Chinese are the guys who operate it on the ground. The Americans are forced to, and the Canadians and the Europeans, anybody doing business in China, they have to send their technology over to these Chinese, to the Chinese company. They have to train the Chinese workers to operate the plant. And as a result, there's this huge vector for technology theft. It's estimated that since 2001, these Chinese, they've stolen over $9.9 trillion worth of American intellectual property and industrial technology, right? So we're talking about massive, massive capital and technological outflows just being drained from America. And it's a huge problem. Nobody's talking about it, but it's mission critical at this point.
Where does Canada fit into all this? I mean, we hear a lot about Canada, and of course, right off the bat, Canadians know nothing about tariffs because they think that if a tariff is 25%, that means that whatever widget you're going to buy, it's going to be 25% more, and that's not true, is it?
No, it's not true at all. I mean, it could hypothetically be true in very specific circumstances, but in general, tariffs are applied to the first nation where the product came out of. So, for example, if you had a 100% tariff on China, uh, that'll be on the cost of whatever is exported from China. But nobody buys directly from China. Everything that's coming from China is going through a middleman in Hong Kong or Singapore. So, these agents, these purchasing agents in Hong Kong or Singapore, they might buy, for example, a Chinese toaster for $7. And then they'll mark that up and they'll sell it to the Americans or the Canadians for $15. And then that goes to Walmart, and then they mark it up to $40, and that's the price you end up paying. But the tariff isn't on the sticker price that you pay at the store. The tariff is on the price that the Chinese made it for. So a 100% tariff, for example, on a toaster from China, if the toaster costs $7 to make, it's going to be $7 tariff. It's not going to be a 25% increase on the $40 sticker price you see. So tariffs aren't a sales tax. They're a precision tool. They're a scalpel that's used to either generate revenue or to protect domestic industries.
Why don't we in Canada believe in manufacturing? It seems that it's very rare to find something made in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly true. I mean, the reality is that Canada is even farther along the globalist spectrum than America. So we've been, in Canada, been hit really, really hard with offshoring to China, and you can see that. Here's another thing. So when a country runs a trade deficit, uh, you still have to pay for the goods, right? So, for example, when America and Canada, we run these really large trade deficits with China, we're not selling them products in exchange. So how do we buy it? What are we doing to pay for it? Well, there's only two ways we can pay for it. We either have to sell assets like real estate or stock market, or we have to sell debt. So, typically bonds, right? So all of this money that's flowing into China through these trade deficits, it actually comes back to our countries through the balance of payments. But it doesn't come back to your, ordinary person in the form of wages or products. It gets pumped into the real estate market and it's pumped into the stock market. So there's big money to be made in Bay Street and Wall Street in selling out the regular people and our industries. I mean, you look at Vancouver. I think something like 20% of houses in Vancouver are Chinese investment properties. Where'd they get money to buy all these? Well, from the trade deficit.
Wow. I have one more question, then I'll let Corey. The whole thing about taxes, when you were talking about way back in the beginning when tariffs were running and before the United States went off of gold and went onto the dollar, there was virtually no taxes because it was the tariffs that basically were paying for the government. Is that true?
Yeah, that's correct. And it's actually, I'm really glad you brought that up because it gives me a chance to talk about tariffs and the size of government. So you're entirely correct. The American government was almost entirely funded on tariffs throughout the 1800s and early 1900s. Income tax wasn't a thing until 1913. There was a brief period in the Civil War where there was an income tax in place, but that was a temporary measure. From the founding of America up until 1913, it was all tariffs. And tariffs are a great form of taxation, and I'm going to tell you why. Because if you raise the tariff too high, people are just going to buy American. People are not going to buy the imports, and therefore the revenue decreases. So the higher you raise a tariff, you lower the tax revenue at the end of the day. And the benefit of that is that a government can't borrow infinitely against a diminishing tax base. right? So what tariffs do is they actually keep the ability of the government to borrow in check because there's a natural balance in place. The reason that the governments are able to print all this money and borrow all of this money is because there's a ready market of foreign purchasers who are flush with this cash. They got to buy American debts or assets, right? So they basically have an unlimited supply of people willing to purchase our debt. If the government was run on tariffs, that would no longer be the case, because if you raise the tariffs too high, you'd run out of revenue. And as a result, you couldn't borrow against that revenue because you'd never get it. So tariffs are a small government option because they prevent this unlimited borrowing that we've seen that's really, causing all sorts of other problems. Tariffs are like a way to reinstate the gold standard without actually going back to the gold standard. And the gold standard promotes savings, it promotes investment, and it promotes small government. And that's what we want. And that's why I love tariffs.
Wow.
Love it.
I'm so glad you're here. I just, we got to have you back for sure. I'm so glad you're here because this is a mind game. Like we're when we hear the word tariff, we're scared. We should be cheering. You know what I mean? From when I hear what you're saying, when we hear the word tariffs, we should be happy. Let me ask you this. If I get this correct, we went through last 4 years of really wiping out the middle class, the mom and pop shops, you know what I mean? The local, stores. If I'm hearing you correctly, tariffs should help promote and grow the mom and pop, operations. Is that wrong? Am I getting that right or wrong? Because more people then will buy local or whatever because of the tariff situation. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's entirely correct. I mean, tariffs have always been used throughout history to promote local production. Tariffs are actually the oldest form of taxation. There were people in Bronze Age Mesopotamian city-states imposing tariffs on other city-states. I mean, these are the ways, one of the main ways that the Mycenaeans in ancient Greece in the Bronze Age were raising tax revenue. I mean, tariffs are sort of a tried and true method to promote local production. So and you got to remember that when people talk about the free market and they want free international trade, these people are charlatans. They're entirely charlatans because you don't actually have a free market. What you have is a global market where American producers and industry are forced to compete with the Chinese. And all of these Chinese companies they're backed by the Communist Party of China. Every one of them receives preferential interest on their loans. They receive land use policies. They get export subsidies. Every Chinese company that's exporting to the States is too big to fail. They can run a loss for 20 years until all the American competition is dead, and then they just jack up the prices because they've got a monopoly. Because this is part of China's industrial policy. So when people talk about having a free market and they want to trade more with China or foreign nations, I mean, they're completely insane. You don't have a free market. You have, instead of a market dominated by American small businesses, you have a market dominated by the Communist Party of China.
Let me ask you this question, because this is what I hear back a lot. Companies go overseas because it's cheaper to produce. That means when they ship it here, it's going to be cheaper for us to buy. How can companies survive? How expensive are things going to be if we bring everything back to America, manufacture it in America, and sell it to Americans? How does that? Because it's like, in China, you can pay someone $1 an hour. In America, you got to pay someone $30 an hour or whatever. How does that balance out?
Well, the reality is that the cheap goods is a myth to begin with. We never got cheap goods. We never got cheap goods. And the reason for that is because goods aren't so cheap when you're unemployed and you're competing for wages with people in China, because the wages have stagnated. So for your average person, the goods are not cheap because of this race to the bottom in terms of labor costs, right? It used to be up until I think 1975 that production and wages were correlated, such that when a worker made more product, they received a higher wage. That's no longer the case. For the last 50 years, those numbers have decoupled. So, for example, your average factory worker in the States is making 220% more product per hour than they were in the 1970s, and they're getting paid less when you adjust the wage for inflation. So cheap goods is a myth, and you got to look at these invisible forms of inflation as well. Uh, Invisible inflation is product quality, and it's the substitution of different products. So, for example, when you purchase these machinery or appliances, let's look at home appliances. You purchase a washing machine from China today. If you look at the manufacturer's warranty, the warranties now are, your extended warranty is 5 years. Your typical warranty is 2 years.
Right.
30 years ago, your average warranty was 10 years. You could get an extended warranty for 30 years. Manufacturers aren't standing behind their products anymore because they know they're junk. And you end up buying the same product 2 or 3 times. So how is the good cheaper when you just keep buying it? The goods are not actually cheaper. So that's a total myth. In terms of reshoring and how that's going to affect consumer prices, I mean, anytime you have a major policy shift, of course, there's going to be disruptions in the economy, but those should normalize. And the reason for that is because of this thing called the law of increasing returns. When you manufacture something, the more of it you make, the per unit price decreases. So if American manufacturers were making more products, the per unit price would actually decrease to something very similar to what it is in China.
You know, the interesting thing is I remember way back in the 80s, I was over in El Salvador and I met some executives that were over there closing down a shirt factory. They were making shirts in El Salvador and going to China because they could get the shirts cheaper. And I think the difference was they were paying something like $2 a shirt for in El Salvador, and they could get it for $1 in China. And I can't remember if that was exact, but it's kind of like that. And I remember the thing that hit me, but I never took it any further than this, is, well, I'm not paying $2 for a shirt in Canada. I'm paying, $40, $50, $60 a shirt in Canada. So you're right. The myth thing was never, I mean, the low price thing was always a myth.
Yeah, it was always a myth.
And I agree with you saying the appliances. I bought a dishwasher over a year, less than a year ago. It's already broken down. It was cheap, $300, cheapish. And then it broke down in less than, you know what I mean? And now I got to buy a new one. And it hasn't even lasted like a couple years. It's not covered. So I understand what you're saying. It's not like it's built quality. I mean, you're buying cheap and it's garbage, and then, you're stuck having to rebuy. I get what you're saying there. That's fascinating. Spencer, where can we get the book? It's called Reshore, How Tariffs Will Bring Our Jobs Home and Revive the American Dream. Where can we find it? I want to read it because I got to learn a little more about this, because I think the misinformation and disinformation is massive out there. We don't understand what's going on. And what I hear you're saying is this is actually good. People are going to get more wealthy in our own country, when this happens. Taxation possibly could go away. Gold standard. It's a way to keep the gold standard without having to use the gold standard. Where can we find it?
Yeah, so the book's available right now on Amazon. So you can find it there. I also am active on X and Substack. It's just Real SP Morrison. You can find links to all of my articles. I have a column on The Blaze. I have a column on American Greatness, and I often publish on a host of other websites. I'm very active. So I'm trying to get the information out there, guys.
Are people buying into it? Are they getting it? Are people starting to get it?
I think people are starting to get it. Every interview I do, people are blown away by all these facts. I just don't think people are aware of, what's going on when you talk about the intellectual property theft from China, or you talk about, how Wall Street profits off of the trade deficit. These are things most people aren't aware of. So I'm really happy to get that information out there. Yeah. And the book's a bestseller now. So people are buying into it. So
good for you.
We have less than a minute left. I just wanted to ask you, what got you into writing this kind of book, and what got you into this kind of study in the first place?
Good question.
It's a good question. Yeah, I'm not an economist by trade. I'm a lawyer, a divorce lawyer of all things. That's my day job. But this was just personal interest for me. Again, I've been researching this topic for 10 years. I've been writing about it on a lot of great publications. And really, this is just a passion project for me. I hate what's happening to the lovely American people and to people all over the Western world. And we're sacrificing our future, and we're selling off our inheritance for luxury. And, we can't have this Faustian bargain anymore.
Wow. Well, appreciate you, Spencer. We're definitely going to have you back. Thank you so much. We encourage everyone to get the book, and fascinating topic. You couldn't have come out with a better time to have this book ready to roll. I'm sure it's a bestseller right now. Thank you so much for being here, man.
God bless.
Well, we're definitely having Spencer back. This is a topic, Alan, we hear about all the time. I mean, like it's in the news all the time. And but we really don't, unless you're like, you know, your specialty is this kind of like markets and all that, how things happen. No, we don't understand this. Like we really don't understand this. And you realize, wait a minute, I'm being lied to. I'm being lied to about tariffs. Like I should be happy. And I'm like groaning when I hear the word tariff. It's
Right.
Anyway, do you have something to say about that? It's just fascinating.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's amazing to me too that, you know, you have such a hatred for Donald Trump, you know, across our country. And yet you get a guy like we just had here talking about tariffs. And he's basically saying that what Trump is doing is right on, and it's going to build a nation. It's going to turn things around. And it's like, you know, for the average Canadian who has bought all of this misinformation that's gone on in this nation, I mean, that's going to be a shock to them. And
or
and
American.
hope,
Yeah.
or American, and I hope it's going to be a good shock.
Yeah. Hey, let's give away our booklet. It's called The Living Stone, A Journey of Transformation. It's yours absolutely free. You can get your copy by calling our toll-free line, 1-800-445-3450 in the U.S. In Canada, you could call 1-800-915-0056. Request your free booklet. We'll send it to you in the mail. Alan, why is this booklet important for people to get?
Because you need to develop a personal relationship with Heavenly Father. And once you have that, then you're not going to fear what's going on, even if you have been told a lie and you actually end up kind of thinking that maybe that lie is true. If you stay close to the Lord, you won't be led astray, and it will keep you on the straight and narrow. And that's the beautiful thing. So you need to get that relationship.
Yep, absolutely. If you want to help support our ministry and keep this conversation on the air, we need your support. You can go to our website, gotalktruth.com, click on donate. There's many different ways you can give digitally. If you'd like to give by mail, you can. You can make your check payable to Heritage Christian Ministries Association and send it to 246 Stewart Green, Southwest, Suite 3260, Calgary, Alberta, T3H3C8. If you'd like to call for prayer or to donate that way, you can get free prayer at toll-free number 1-800-915-0056 in Canada, 1-800-445-3450 in the U.S. All right, Dad, we're out of time. We'll see you guys later.
Love you.